Bum, bum, bum. Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 123. As always, I am going to start us off with a tune. And I even managed to stop that this week. Good stuff. All right.
To veil the threats of terror and check the show of pride. By hopeless speech and simple, 100 times made plain. You see another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that Eden fought? Bring all your hopes to Lord. Take up the white man's burden, not tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your giving and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian guys? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent people shall wear your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy young grudge praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No words would give what wisdom the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard, or Daddy Gard, as he should be called these days. Go and check out his channel if you like some good music. Welcome to my guest this evening. How are you going, Mitch?
Maybe same old.
I could actually pre-record that, couldn't I? And welcome also AI. How are you going, mate?
Not too bad, thank you. Pretty, good day. I nearly had a punch up with a cyclist today, so
don't blame you. Was he one of those lycra wearing types?
Oh yeah, like literally Bradley Wiggins reincarnation types.
Yeah, so I don't mind people on push bikes, but like your actual cyclist who wears lycra, I have no room for whatsoever.
Yes, and it was really funny because it was actually a Marks and Spencer's. So I thought to myself, I don't want to get kicked out of Marks and Spencer's. Yeah. Of course, that's where I do my shopping too.
Oh no, fair enough. My wife used to shop in Marks and Spencer's when there was one available, or Waitrose sometimes. I think was the other one. Not that I paid much attention to it, but yeah. Michael K, 19th century fan, wants to know what's up with Mitch's avatar. I know what it is, but Mitch, do you want to tell him?
Oh, it's basically it Frodo at Main Doom going, it's over, like it's done.
Due to I take it.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, what? It's been 9 months since they started fighting for it. At least we get to stop talking about it.
Oh, excellent. I see Sniper's Nest is in the chat, who's on the Discord and is a good bloke. Do check his channel out. By the way, people may have noticed there's no entropy this week for paid chats, and that's just because entropy isn't working for me at the moment, and I'm working with entropy to try and fix it, which hopefully will be by the time I do the next stream, but we'll see. So yeah. All right. Well, as always, I generally ask people if they have a first subject they'd like to start with. I take it, Mitch, in your case, you probably want to say a little bit about Russia finally winning in Bakhmut. Ukraine supposedly winning the war, but they're not winning many of these battles.
Nah, I mean, I remember one thing that's suspicious is how you got you got these 3 heavily fortified areas. One's called the Nest, which fell within 3 days of it being of Wagner actually reaching the area. Then there's another one called Domino, which pretty much fell like a domino. So the name was very appropriate there because it fell within 2 days of it being fought over. And the third area, I can't pronounce it. It's a Russian term. It doesn't translate well into English. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, they all fell within quick succession of one another. Which
do you think? I mean, what I think is that the 2 little counterattacks that the Ukrainians did a week or so ago on either side of Bakhmut, they were specifically designed to try and make a route for the guys to retreat from Bakhmut. That was the only thing they were for. That was their only purpose, was to try and clear a route so not so many Ukrainians got captured.
Yeah, it looks like a situation where after they took up the first 600 meters, we've not heard anything about it. So that either the Russians stonewalled them and prevented them from advancing any further, or their original plan anyway was to just take enough land to unblock the roads so that when we eventually leave Bakhmut, they don't get absolutely strafed over by Wagner machine gun fire or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely what it looked like to me, to be honest, though, because there was no other purpose to it that I could see. I mean, it wasn't like they were going to push the Russians back significantly.
Yeah, I mean, you had like the usual suspects go, oh yeah, this is like Ukraine's version of Operation Uranus, where they were going to envelop an entire army group or whatever.
a big arrow offensive, if ever there was one. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to know what the Russian strategy in Ukraine is. I think they're winning. They seem to be able to attack from the air with missiles or aircraft, or a combination thereof. They seem to be able to attack Ukraine pretty much at will all over the place. And on the battlefront, I don't see the Ukrainians like taking lots of land anywhere. And if you're winning, that's what you do. You take areas.
Yeah, it's generally
advancing slowly, but they are advancing.
Or at least you hold. I mean, at least you hold areas. I mean, not so much taking. If you can hold areas, that's a good start. But they can't even do that by the looks of it.
Look, I mean, Mitch and I were talking before we went live, and the Ukrainians have used a hell of a lot of troops in Bakhmut. I mean, how many was it you were saying, Mitch?
They use, just in terms of brigades, never mind with regiments and battalions and such, just in terms of brigades, they use 37 brigades, which...
And roughly how many men is that you're talking about there? You were telling me how many men it was. What?
Yeah, 37 times 5,000 brings you to 185,000.
Yeah, and to put that into perspective for anyone who's listening to this, the entire British Army these days is like 80,000 men, maybe. In fact, it's probably a bit less than that. And if you wanted to add the Royal Marines on top, you still wouldn't get to 85,000. So that's a lot of men, a lot.
So the Ukrainians really were chucking the kitchen sink at Bakhmut, and even with that, even with all the Western support, all the military aid, all the political and all aspects of aid and support, Russia and the Wagner Group in particular prevailed.
Yeah,
well, yeah, undeniably, yeah. And they've cost the Ukrainians a huge number of casualties. You know, I mean, not just in dead, but in wounded dudes and like dudes who are maimed and are never going to be useful anymore. You know, Sniper's Nest in the chat, by the way, is saying that that's roughly the size of the United States Marine Corps. The number of men that the Ukrainians have lost in Bakhmut. Or used.
I mean, what's been really funny is that yesterday in the I think it was in the Times, I was reading an article, basically saying that, and this was, I believe this was like in the Guardian and a few other papers, that the situation in Bakhmut was that the Russians were withdrawing. It's going to be likely Ukrainian victory. Counter to what, bearing in mind, I've been on your channel now, Iron Duke, for quite a few months, and we've been getting like the odd weekly or for me fortnightly updates. So I've been able to see in real time that is just not the case. No, I was, even if it was just be a stalemate, like a Stalingrad sort of condition in the city where it's effectively divided up, yesterday it was Ukraine is imminent victory, and then today the same journalist who wrote it, with Sky News, basically said, it looks like Russia has prevailed, and it's like, what happened to like 12 hours ago? What happened 12 hours ago? The Russians have this huge.
The propaganda coming out of the Ukrainians and the NATO and America, etc., about Ukraine, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous, and most of it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, Sagana in the chat is saying, "Don't forget the RAF regiment, Andrew." Funnily enough, I mentioned that to Mitch just before we went live. I have a mate who's in the RAF regiment, and he did a tour in Cyprus last year and was really pissed because the China virus regulations made it a crap tour. But like the RAF regiment these days is like maybe 800 blokes. But for anyone who doesn't know, they defend the RAF airfields on the ground and also man some of the anti-aircraft missiles and this kind of stuff. So yeah.
Oh yes, I know them quite well. Very, very well.
Their
would say,
nickname in their
family.
nickname in the British armed forces is the Rock Apes from Gibraltar. Yes. I'm not going to go into why, mind you, because that's not a particularly nice story. But anyway, so yeah, Russia has finally won this thing. In fact, we'll have to see what happens next. You know, we've had this much heralded Ukrainian counterattack, which doesn't seem to be happening at the moment, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was quite interesting, and I was actually thinking back to it today, was when you had Orthodox Easter Orthodox celebration. I was seeing on, not just like Telegram, but also Reddit and things, conversations where you had people in claiming to be in Ukraine, and I can actually believe this because it was sounded believable because of course Ukraine is a very Christian country. Well, it was a very it's a very Christian country. The more I guess I think what was it like 80% Orthodox of those that identify.
Yeah, but
Um,
Zelensky, you need to bear in mind
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Zelensky regime has like been arresting
Is
Orthodox priests
yeah,
and stuff, as far as I can work out.
yeah. Yeah, and that was because you have a lot of Ukrainian men in the military who are actually, massively demoralized because there have been some who've been thinking, wait a minute, this is like, in many ways, it's very reminiscent of what the Soviet suppression of Christianity and traditionalism, and then this is what the Zelensky regime is doing. And there was, especially around Easter, there was quite a few arrests. That you had monasteries which were where the monks were rebooted because they were seen as Putin propagandists. But as I pointed out at the time, they were not Putin propagandists. They just conducted their religious ceremonies in the Russian Rite, which is just doing it in the traditional language of the Kievan Rus, because that's where the birthplace of Russian Orthodoxy, if we want to be technical about it, took place. It was the Kievan Rus princes, and they converted to Christianity in the 10th century there, and that became the formation of the modern Russian state.
For sure, AI. And I mean, look, also let's bear in mind, when you're looking at Ukraine, you have to look at the fact that Eastern Ukraine, which is the bit the Russians are fighting in, is majority Russian, really. Western Ukraine is absolutely majority Ukrainian. Yeah. And these people are very, very intermixed, very closely related, and often intermarried. But in general terms, Eastern Ukraine is Russian and Western Ukraine is actually Ukrainian. But of course, you never hear any of this from the Western mainstream media. None.
Well, no, because I remember there are several history channels, and history channels I will say, who know better, who do know better, but they just decided to take the Zelensky bucks at the outset and actually denied the reality of that relationship in Ukraine. The fact that Western Ukraine, for most of its history, has been under the rule of either the Hungarian kingdom or the Polish kingdom plus Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So in that regard, that is very true. And the fact that Eastern or Novia Russia, the eastern part of of Ukraine, has been, it went from controlled by the various steppes to the I'm just trying to think, what was it, Peter the Great, probably even earlier. It was it was colonized effectively. The people who moved, because it was mainly just unoccupied land. It was just
I mean, look,
land that wasn't.
Ukraine literally means borderland, as far as I understand it. Is that not correct, Mitch?
Yeah, that Krai part in like Russian, like generally that Krai part in Slavic language generally means either strange land or borderland. That's generally what it means, because it's like that little bit of land that Russia is fighting over, because the city name is called Bakhmut. I mean, Bakhmut is a Tatar name for the city, while the Russians will call it Artyomsk after some.
Yeah, I
communist
guess it
fella.
will start being called that again, Mitch. Not that there's much left of it, it has to be said. Like as someone said in the chat earlier, you look at Bakhmut, photographs of Bakhmut, and it's basically, it looks like a bombed out German city from 1945. Like there's nothing left of it. It's just shells. Rebuilding it is going to cost a fortune.
Yeah, I mean, last time they also used one of those Storm Shadow missiles to bombard a few Mariupol flats, I believe.
Oh, look, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In fact, I'll talk about it now, since you've segued us into it, Mitch. I have followed a particular channel on YouTube, which I'm not going to name, because it is a British military kit channel, and like I'm a former British soldier, and I just find British military kit and stuff interesting. And they also do some film reviews of British war movies and this kind of stuff, which is another subject that I quite like. But they did a video for reasons I don't understand about the Brits sending Storm Shadow to Ukraine, which I don't think we should have done because, you know, why is Britain at war with Russia? Russia's not our enemy as far as I can work out, but, you know, anyway, which is what I said basically in the comments. But I also called someone a twit for something they said. And so YouTube flashed up a pop-up saying, are you sure you want to be this insulting in the chat? Yeah. So I changed it. I edited it. Yeah. But I got called adult, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a worse insult than calling someone a twit, which is pretty mild. And I also got called something that I'm absolutely sure, I can't remember what it was now, but I'm 100% certain it was a Ukrainian swear word. Because, you know, you can tell a swear word when you swear one. I got called both of those, and I just left the channel. I just said, oh, fuck this. I'm not following a channel that puts out propaganda like that.
Yeah, I mean the one history channel I mentioned, it's quite known. It's Kings and
I'm not. The Kings and Generals is just total Ukrainian shill channel. Yes,
yeah.
it is. Yeah, 100%.
And the team there, you know, the fact that they put out a video when they went on the history of Ukraine, and they said, let's start with clarifying Ukraine has no, and Kiev has no ties to Russia. And I was like, you pieces of shit. Like, really, that fucking disgraceful.
Ukraine as an entity was created by the Soviet Union, for God's sake. It's like
Kiev was the spirit, was the birthplace of the Russian identity. There's just okay, you can talk about maybe Novgorod and such, but it doesn't matter. The birthplace of the you know, the Russian identity, the seats of the Ruriks, the first Russian dynasty, it is Kiev. And it's not Kiev.
Yeah, it's Kiev. Absolutely.
It's Kiev. Yeah. And nobody. Okay, maybe some fucking mongoloid Polish adjacent Ukrainians have called it, you know, Kiev or something, but it's Kiev. It's always been Kiev.
Yeah, no. Look, the Zelensky regime is just trying to like do what it always does and propagandize and lie, pretty much. I mean, I'm not saying the Russians don't lie, because I'm sure they do. You know, in war, everyone lies because you have to fool the enemy somewhere or another. But yeah, I don't like. Look, I don't really care who runs Ukraine. If I'm really honest, it's not a vital British or Old Commonwealth interest. It's not. But all the people who support Ukraine are people I detest. From people like senile Biden through Indian banker Rishi Sunak downwards. They're all people I despise. So that's why if I some people sometimes say I'm a Russian shill, I'm not. I just don't like the people who support Ukraine. It's the real truth.
What I find really dark and sickening with the support of Ukraine is that if you look at Ukraine, and I'm talking about Ukraine before the 2014 coup, if you look at Ukraine, okay, and you can say corruption, whatever, okay. If you look at Ukraine, you had a society which was stable, that was Christian, socially conservative, normal, functionally normal, right? And through the conflict, which, let's be honest, was created because the Ukrainian government wouldn't sit round with the people of Lushanka and the Donetsk regions, who broke away because they viewed it as an illegitimate coup, which it was. It was an illegitimate coup.
And the same with the Crimea, which was always been
Yes.
Russian, basically. I mean,
Yeah, pretty much.
their main naval base in the Black Sea is Sevastopol, for God's sake.
During this conflict, Zelensky has, and his groups have arrested and criminalized parties which are, let's say, Russian aligned, even Russian speaking, or not even those that he accuses of being Russian aligned. They're gone. And during this process, we have seen gay rights, transsexual rights, secularization, on a
all the
massive,
usual Western bullshit, basically.
the nodes of, and I know there's Americans in chat, and when I say this, I'm not saying you Americans as individuals like Virginians or Texans, but I'm talking about the American state.
Yep.
The
Let me make this very clear. I just gave a shout out to Sergeant Sniper, who is an American and has a good channel.
I know.
He has a good channel.
Yeah, he's a good chap.
He's a very good chap. Go and subscribe to his channel. I know other Americans like Dom the Pleb, for example, who is a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran from Afghanistan. Another really good chap. When we're talking about the Americans, we really mean the American government. But at the same time, Rishi Sunak, as the British Prime Minister, doesn't in any way, shape, or form represent me as an Englishman.
No, he doesn't. And he is he's worse than Corbyn. He's actually, he's worse than Tony Blair. And the reason he's worse than all of those, disgusting creatures put together is that he is such a gig man for the regime that there's just nothing there.
But these British Storm Shadow missiles, which are excellent missiles, by the way, are being used in part to attack Russian civilians. Is that what British taxpayers paid for them for? I don't think so.
No. But this is a long-standing thing with Britain after Britain post World War II, is that everything that has happened to the country, most people, overwhelmingly, people have rejected it. Mass immigration from the Caribbean and Africa and India. Majority of even Labour voters at that time were against it.
Well, I think they still would be, to be honest. But look, you've also got to know, you've also got to realise that, like, not even the Conservative Party members voted for Rishi Sunak.
No,
and in fact, when he put himself up for election twice, he was rejected, but he was still parachuted in.
And I mean, there is something that did happen, which when we get round to it, I'd probably choose as my topic of discussion. Was the National Conservatism Conference? Because while
that would be interesting to talk about in a bit. It would.
There's one chap who I'd like to talk about, because there's actually, I mean, most of it was cut. He had that YouTuber, what's her name? Katusha or something.
Yeah. I know Poe, the person who people may know from AA Stream. She went to the first day of that, didn't she?
And you had Danny Kruger, MP, who's actually quite interesting character. We'll get into him because he Rishi really threw him under the bus. It really threw him under the bus.
Well, by saying that we need more immigration. Well, that's a surprise from an Indian
Well, no,
banker, isn't it?
It wasn't even that. It really wasn't even that. It was Danny Kruger, and this is the most milquetoast. Like even your bare basic Republican. Thank you. That's her name. Your bare basic Republican in America could come up with this. Well, maybe not even the bare basics, but the underpinning of a normal society is fundamentally a strong family. That's all he said. Now, 30 years ago, that would have been a given, I think, for most conservatives. It would have been a given, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even Labour, because I remember Tony Blair used to talk a lot about the family, and even Gordon Brown would go on about the family as well. The family unit.
All lying, of course, but yes.
Yeah, all lying, but they would give lip service to that. And Rishi was asked by a newspaper at the time saying, "Do you agree with that statement?" And he just replied,
yeah,
"No."
you're right. I
Yeah.
remember now. He said, no, traditional families are not essential for a reasonable society. Yeah, I
Yeah,
do remember now. Thank you.
yeah. So, and that's like, yeah, okay. So, so so you can't, okay, you can't defend even the family.
No,
You know,
no.
okay. So,
But look, is Rishi Sunak your prime minister? Do you regard him as like the British prime minister? Because I don't myself. I mean, I know
no,
he is. I know he actually is, but
well, number one, I've rejected all parliamentary politics. I mean, it's just all bullshit. It's all pantomime bullshit at this stage. But
yeah.
I view him as a placeholder for Keir Starmer. I think at the end of the day, because if you look at the cabinet that came round before he was installed, like Hunt was in league with Campbell and Mandelson and all the old.
We effectively have, and it's the same in Australia, and it's the same in the USA with the mainstream Republicans and the Democrats. We effectively have, in terms of the so-called conservatives, in air quotes, and Labour, we have a uni-pie. There's no difference between them, really.
No, and you know, Rishi Sunak's job is, I mean, I don't even want to say that he's to balance the books, because of course he's not even that, but his job is he's just a placeholder. He's there to deliver that ridiculous fucking awful smile of his, and to basically further destruction of the West and our country and our people.
I mean, look, the
job.
conservatives are going to get destroyed at the next general election, and
Yeah.
rightly so. Where I differ from some people on the right is, don't vote Labour, guys. Just don't. Vote for any of the smaller right of centre populist parties, and I don't even care which one, but vote for one of them. Don't vote for Labour, please. It will equally destroy the Conservative Party if you do that, and it won't help Labour.
I mean, one of the problems is in my seat where I live, it's very common that there's like four parties standing, and it's like, was it Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, and Green? So
all of which you should avoid like the plague.
Yeah, so it would result in me just not, if that was the case. If I mean, I wouldn't vote. I'd vote Heritage. I'd definitely vote Heritage if they were
for
on
sure.
the ballot.
I would vote any of them. I'd even rather vote Reform rather than Labour. Labour. And I'm not pretending for a minute that I think the Reform Party is a good party, because I don't. I have many issues with some of their policies, but I would rather vote Reform than Labour as a protest vote.
I mean, though, at the end of the day, I doubt they'd even stand. If there was an independent standing and he was good or something, I might consider. But at the end of the day, I probably wouldn't vote, if I'm absolutely honest.
No, I do. Look, I think that's foolish. Like, then you just end up like Portugal, where only about 40% of people vote, but the left just keeps going on and on because they don't care if you don't vote. They don't care if you don't vote. They like it if you don't vote. You've got to vote, but like, don't vote for any of the main parties.
I know, Iron Duke, but you remember what happened to the BNP when they actually became a threat? Remember what they did?
Look, I know this. Look, I'm very conscious, AI, that like this is supposed to be Mitchie's section of the stream, and you can talk as much as you like about what you want to talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
So, but I just think, look, you've got to vote, because if you don't, they'll just think you don't care, right? That's all they think, and they don't care if you don't vote because they just want to win. And my thinking is that if you're on the right at the next general election and you want the Conservatives destroyed, and every good person on the right does now, the British so-called Conservative Party isn't conservative in the least. They deserve to be destroyed. Don't vote Labour though, and obviously don't vote the Watermelon Greens or the SDP. Equally vile. You've got to vote for one of the right of centre, smaller populist parties, and I really don't care which one, to be honest. But that's the only thing you have to do. Sniper's Nest in the chat says we don't have a right wing. We do, but it doesn't have any political power. But your right wing in America doesn't have any political power. Sniper's Nest either.
I mean, Sniper, I love you, man, and everything. I will say this: I wouldn't view the MAGA movement as right wing. What I would define as the true right wing. The true right wing would be probably the paleocons like Pat Buchanan,
yes.
Paul Gottfried, people like that. That's who I would. And if you look at them, I mean, the only voice they had in the establishment was Tucker Carlson. He was the only guy inviting them on. All the other idiots on Fox News just, they just went for like the gay black conservative Trump.
And what happened to Tucker Carlson? He was sacked from Fox News.
Yeah, but by a member of I don't need to say it, but
I understand.
Yeah.
Look, we'll come back to you in a minute, now. Mitch, this is really your segment of the stream. So, look, Russia's won in Bakhmut now. Good, as far as I'm concerned. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I haven't got any clue. I have to say, if I was Putin, I'd be doing another limited call-up, because I would want to overwhelm the Ukrainians and their Western backers sooner rather than later. I can't see the purpose in letting this go on year after year, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't. I can't really predict if Putin's going to do that, because, I mean, I think it's like, on one hand, he doesn't want there to be some sort of economic downturn if after a mobilization or whatever. But then again, one might say, because let's say after this war, in the event of a Russian victory, and you get loads of guys coming home, you might get somewhat of a baby boom in Russia. Perhaps that's me being optimistic. But yeah, it's just, I'll generally say, with taking a Bakhmut, I mean, Bakhmut pretty much served the same purpose of what Bastogne did in the Battle of the Bulge, where massive road network in town. If you want to attack in several directions, you'd have to have that place to attack anywhere. So Russia's got a lot of options. But probably might take Avdiivka, because that's where Ukrainian artillery is operating from to bombard the city of Donetsk. I imagine,
and kill civilians, because there's not much Russian military in Donetsk as far as I can work out. But
yeah. Aside from that, aside from that, Wagner have said they're gonna keep control of the city for the next 5 days, and then they're gonna withdraw from Ukraine altogether, because they've suffered so many losses.
Well, they deserve to go for some R&R and to refit and to recruit and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely, they do.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, there are also commitments in Africa, especially like the whole Sudan civil war going on.
I don't see many of them getting sent there at the moment, mate. But all right, fair enough. But I mean, they absolutely they've fought long and hard, and they need a rest and to recruit their units back up to strength again, for sure. Welcome to Nathan CJ Hood in the chat. Another excellent channel you should go subscribe to. And to let people know, I know Nathan has got a Wagner Day coming up in the next few days. Wagner's not my cup of tea, but I think it will be an interesting stream. So go and check them out.
Yeah, I find it.
I just wanted to ask you, Mitch, apparently the Americans are now going to give the Ukrainians F-16 jets. What do you think about it? Yeah, Wagner, the music, Josephina Herringway. Yeah. Apparently, the Americans are going to give the Ukrainians F-16 jets. Again, I don't see this as being something that's going to change the fate of the war. It might keep it going longer, which is what America really wants. You know, America wants this to be a forever war. When I say America, I mean the American government, not the people. But the American government wants this to be a forever war. But I don't think it's going to change all that much.
Yeah, I've heard it's going to be like 50 of them. Instead of is it like 18 months? I think it said like the recommended training time for an F-16. They're going to shorten it down to 4 months per pilot.
Yeah, which will make them far less good pilots. But yeah, all right.
Well, don't tell people on Twitter that, because apparently if you train a pilot in 4 months, that's clear sign that the Ukrainians are just a god's gift on earth and they can do nothing wrong. Like
I'd be interested to know how many trained pilots Ukraine actually has left, given that most of its air force was shot down 6 months ago. But you know, whatever.
I mean, Zelensky has been pushing for aircraft for a long time, and America and Germany in particular in the EU have been very, very hesitant to commit that because it is obviously an escalation. And so because now that this Zelensky's gotten what he wanted, the question comes down to really is beyond, because obviously then there'll be another there'll be another demand. I'm guessing the next stage is probably boots on the ground, Western boots on the ground at this point.
No, man, if you can't do that, AI, if you do that, World War III is just around the corner, man. Russia has a huge nuclear arsenal. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying the Western leaders these days are not stupid enough to do it, but if they do, then none of this will matter because we'll all die because there'll be a nuclear war. If they put Western troops on the ground in Ukraine, there will almost certainly be a nuclear war, and we'll all be dead inside a year.
Yes, I mean there is
the vast majority of us, not all of us, but the vast majority of us will be dead within a year. It's insanity.
There is one thing that I was thinking, and look at I say the pause, the global American regime, NATO, and all that sort of stuff. If Russia were to win, there could be a kickback on us in some way, because you could have the scenario where they take an L and they basically look, instead of expansionist like policies in the East and like in Afghanistan and the Middle East, it could be it could be, you could have a scenario where the attention of their attention could be on distance in Europe and in America to even greater than it is now, let's say.
You're probably right about that. I see what you're saying there. But the idea of sending Western troops into Ukraine, that's going to result in World War III and a nuclear exchange. 99% chance. Because what you have to realize is Russia cannot lose this war. If Russia loses this war, Russia's fucked. Excuse my language.
Yes.
Like
I think
it's done. And that is the whole object of the Americans. They want Russia to be done. That's the whole point of the war.
I mean, the amount. I think Nathan CJ Hood's just pointed out that even they got Mark Hamill, aka Luke Skywalker, doing announcements for them. I mean, the amount of
and he's an idiot lefty twat anyway. But all right, fair enough.
The amount of cultural cultural weight that has been thrown behind this. If the West were to lose, which I think is on the tables at this point, how would they respond to taking that L?
Look, I don't understand how at one and the same time the Americans are absolutely trying to big up a war with China. And do you know what? A war against China, I wouldn't totally be against, because the Chinese Communist Party I don't like. All right. One and the same time, they're trying to do that while still going on with this nonsense in Ukraine against the Russians. And even America is nowhere near strong enough to fight those two wars at the same time. Nowhere near. They just don't have the troops and aircraft and ships to fight both of those wars at the same time. Even America does not. Adam in the chat says that war with China is suicidal. Not as suicidal as war with Russia over Ukraine is, in my opinion. Like a war with China would be like not only the Americans, it would be the Americans, the Japanese, the Australians, the British, certainly, probably the South Koreans. Like, and you know what? Western submarines are still a hell of a lot better than anything the Chinese have, and there would be so many Chinese ships going boom. It would be unbelievable. And you get all these shields from China talking about hypersonic anti-aircraft carrier missiles and all the rest of it. Never been used, never been tested, never had a success. We'll see.
I mean,
that to me is a much more winnable war than this nonsense that's going on in Ukraine at the moment for nothing. Because at the end of the day, who cares if Ukraine is half the size it is now, which is basically what I reckon the Russian final position will be. Like, if Russia can get Ukraine to be a landlocked rump state, I reckon the Russians will say, yeah, cool.
I mean, Alice was pointing out as well in chat with Nathan Hood. This could be a scenario where, Tony Blair is controlling the Russian side and the Western side.
Yeah, I don't go along with academic agent on how powerful Tony Blair is, and I don't like Tony Blair at all. But anyway,
well, regardless,
I'd rather hang Tony Blair than give him the knighthood, as was in fact given to him. But that's
on a serious note, though, I do wonder, because there are
in Minecraft, of course, YouTube in Minecraft.
I do wonder, because there are elements in the EU which want to remove American influence from Europe, and so let's be honest. France, Germany, Macron, Germany, they didn't care about Ukraine, and they don't really care about it now. Poland only cares because they love hating the Russians, and that's about it. Hungary couldn't give a damn, and no one else could give a damn. So I do have to wonder. He's enough pain. Have you seen? Actually, Sherry Blair's. She's a bit rotunda now. Have you seen her? She's very rotunda.
I always thought she was ugly. I never had any opinion on her.
She was quite petite back in like.
But she was still ugly.
Days. Well, yes, but now she's now
she's fat and ugly. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
in Minecraft YouTube, she's not really fat and ugly, obviously, because no one's fat and ugly, really.
And that dress says otherwise, but
But yeah, no. Look, again, I'll take this back to Mitch. What are you reckon, man?
On like the whole EU wanting to get rid of America, I think like in a way this Ukraine war's kind of really kicked the ball in America's favour because Germany's been cooked after Nord Stream got nuked and
by the Americans, of course.
Yeah, I'm a French.
Anyone who doesn't realise that the Americans were the people who blew up Nord Stream is like moron would be too weak a word for them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, then you got the case of France, who ever since Napoleon went, they can't do anything by themselves. You always have to have someone holding their hand. So without Germany, France won't do anything.
No. And Germany is these days like absolutely and totally and completely cut as far as I can work out.
Yeah. I'd say like in terms of like the people on Twitter, I have to engage with the Germans as much as I can be Germanophilic. They are also the most annoying because for some reason they just are really obsessed about the word genocide.
There are still some good Germans. Like I follow a channel called what is it? German Red Pill or something like that. I can't remember his name now, but like I follow this dude's channel, Red Pill Germany, I think it is, and he's a good bloke. And of course, there are good Germans still, but like in general speaking, Germany is just totally cut.
Yeah, East Germany wasn't. That's the ironic thing, actually. In it, it really wasn't. It wasn't until even today, East Germans are different from the West Germany because they didn't have to engage in high levels of personal and cultural degrading tactics.
They just didn't have any. They just didn't have any freedom whatsoever under the Ruskies. But yeah,
that's okay.
Sorry. Let me change that. They didn't have any freedom whatsoever under the Soviets. I beg your pardon.
That's
like
right.
One of the big differences to me today, and all of the Western propaganda tries to get rid of, is they keep trying to say, "Oh yeah, the Russians are still commies." No, they're not. They're just not.
No, I wish they were.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I don't wish they were. I'm sorry, I don't wish they were. I don't like communists. I beg your pardon. Like my military career was mostly spent killing communists. So yeah, I'm not a fan of communists. Never will be. Never have been. One reason I'm not totally against the idea of fighting China, if China is stupid enough to try and invade Taiwan. I'm not totally against that. That's a different thing to me, to this whole nonsense which is going on in Ukraine, where no vital interests of any Western nation are at stake. But vital interests of the Russians absolutely are at stake. That to me is the difference. 555, bigger girls are better in the sack. Sorry, mate, don't agree. But there you go, that's you.
Yeah, on East Germany, I mean, I won't say they were based. I mean, for one, you'd have both mothers and fathers working in the factories while the children would pretty much spend all the time with like the sort of communist youth programs and in the schools where they'd be taught about the socialist revolution. Meanwhile, you had a lot of this propaganda about what the ideal socialist Germany would look like. And a lot of it featured a lot of mixed race people. So,
yeah.
I mean, I would say though. I mean, my thesis on East Germany being based was Honecker, because Honecker did, he signed the Helsinki Agreement, and he signed the various church acts where church schools and church hospitals and the Lutheran Church actually had quite a prominent role in society. And also, he brought back a lot of Prussian military traditions, which
Prussia was destroyed by the West, of course, not by the Russians.
Yeah, well, exactly. But the most of East Germany, what was the Prussian, most of East Germany consisted of what was old Prussia. It even brought back the statue of Frederick the Great. So, the reason I say East Germany was based because you had this point in Germany where in East Germany there were celebrations of of Prussian, like true, like Germanic culture. Even okay, yes, it was in a socialist regime, but there was a point where it was celebrated, and the German people there could internalize that and understand that. And then just across the wall, you had kids on drugs listening to American music, and who had been taught to hate their own culture for decades at that point, and their own their own people. And
No,
so
fair enough, fair enough.
that's why
I don't disagree with what you're saying. But Prussia as a geographical political thing was actually destroyed by the West. It wasn't destroyed by the Russians. And the reason the reason the West did it is that part of Prussia was in East Germany, so it was easier
the Brandenburg part.
It was easier to get rid of it. But that was why Prussia was, and like I don't know, like Prussia, I guess for the Germans would have been as central as England is for the British in many respects.
Yeah.
Anyway, final thoughts, Mitch, on this bit of our chat, and then we'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I can't really predict about what's.
I think we've lost AI, but hopefully it will come back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know much about Frederick the Great, other than because I've been reading about 7 Years' War book I posted about in Discord, which is my book mainly focused on the British Empire versus the French. It didn't really focus on Frederick the Great at all because there's a separate book for him.
Yeah, is that an American book you're reading at the moment, Mitch?
I'll look up.
Just look at the author. The author, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was British because it said naval historian. I mean, most naval historians I've heard of generally tend to be
British. Yeah, I'm just surprised that, if you're going to do a book which is mostly what the Americans call the French and Indian Wars, that's really the 7 Years' War.
Yeah, Daniel Albert Bow.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, he's a naval historian who writes about the 7 Years' War. It's like there's a series of books where it's about different wars. Yeah. So, for example, one book about 7 Years' War between Britain and France. One book all about Frederick the Great's campaigns from the Silesian Wars to partition to Poland, etc.
Yeah, it wouldn't be much use for a naval historian on that one for sure. But it's probably a different author, but it's developed in all the same series apparently. Yeah. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Did you have any final thoughts on what you think is going on in Ukraine, or what might happen next, or anything like that?
I suppose Avdiivka, as I said earlier, will be the next target. Because you practically got the railway line, which is already cut off anyway. But because it's not far from being like totally cut off. If the Russians really want to do a big push, otherwise the Russians can always just we'll probably just spend their time consolidating Bakhmut, given that there's probably groups of stragglers in the city, unknown of. Or
I just live in hopes. I just live in hopes, Mitch, that all these hundreds and hundreds of modern T-90M tanks that we've seen recently are going to get used. I live in hopes of this, like with enough infantry to support them, which of course is vital. So yeah, I'm just hoping that the Russians have something planned. I really do.
Yeah, the thing, I mean, you get the Wagner, as I said, they're going to have at least some R&R, so they'll be out of action for a bit.
Yeah, no,
Don't know how long.
Wagner well deserve a rest, and I believe they're recruiting again now. Anyway, but yeah, sorry, you were saying.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm also. It'd be interesting to see on Ukrainian military chatter, because this news will spread amongst ranks of Ukrainian soldiers all over Ukraine, and so that's definitely going to have a morale. Yeah, I mean, morale was already low anyway because of since the start of the war anyhow, and it's um, I doubt this is going to. I think this could be a turning point in the conflict because of the number of troops involved. It is a big loss, and there's no way of hiding it, really.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that stuff. I think that's very likely. Okay. Someone in the chat here. Someone's not wearing headphones, by the way, because I can hear my voice coming back, and my voice once is bad enough. I just need to check something. I think. There we go. I think the Sir person means this dude.
Yes.
Who I like.
Yeah. He does. He's been doing some really good videos on talk about English identity with Carl and history and culture, and he did one with Morgoth recently, which was a really good one. And
He's done stuff with Morgoth. I think he's done stuff with Nathan C.J. Hood.
oh yes,
Yeah, he I think he has a good channel. And my bit after your bit, I will be talking about something he's been talking about. So,
oh, that'd be nice, cool. Yeah.
All right. So, AI. What was your bit you
Yeah,
wanted to bring up?
I doubt this is going to be quite long because so there were I think it was, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, because I wasn't really paying much attention to this, but you had this I think it was last week. You had the National Conservative Conference, and it wasn't part the Conservative Party. It was an it's conservatism, small c conservatism conference. So it was a collection of a rather interesting set of people. You
Yeah,
had
some better than others, but yes, I'll agree with that. Okay.
yeah, some better. So as we mentioned, we had our somebody from our circles, Alex. Is it Alex Katusha? Is that her name?
Yep.
Yeah. Of course, she's
And as
with.
I said earlier, AI Poe the person from AA streams also went to the first day of that, I believe.
Yeah, and there was also David Starkey was there. You had that you had to be honest, that headmistress, the
Yes,
England's
yeah, from the
headmistress.
supposedly strict school. Yes.
Yeah, in a city, 100%. Okay, apparently I'm pronouncing her name wrong. Could you? So yeah. Anyway,
David Starkey is interesting because David Starkey is a gay guy who I don't mind, whereas you also had
yeah, yes,
the
oh
bloke
god,
who wrote The Strange Death of
Death
Europe,
of
wasn't it?
Europe. Yeah, oh god, I can't remember.
Who's also a gay guy who I'm not sure about. So yeah. And Michael
Yeah,
Gove was there, not based, in my opinion.
Douglas Murray. That's it. Douglas
Yeah,
Murray.
Douglas Murray.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice Little. Yeah, absolutely true.
Yeah, Douglas.
I'm not a big fan of Douglas Murray. I think The Stranger for Europe's not a bad book, but like I think he's a fence sitter a la outrance. Whereas on the other hand, I think David Starkey's a bit more based. But yeah, I saw someone says that Josephina says poor David Starkey's losing his mind. I'm not quite sure how he is, Josephina, to be honest, but all right.
Is he losing his mind?
I don't think so, but apparently
I mean,
Josephina does.
he's still, on his history content, he's still top. Like, if someone was to say, who is probably the best historian on like Tudor history, he's still number one in my
Well,
mind.
if anyone asked who's the best historian on Tudor history, David Starkey still is. So yeah, absolutely. He's not going to be removed from that position ever, I don't think. But
no, exactly. He starts. I mean, he is quite old though.
He's getting old, Josephine. He's even older than me, for God's sake. But yeah,
I think he's older than Biden. I mean, look at bloody Biden.
Yeah, I mean, but Biden doesn't know what day it is. Never mind, like stuttering occasionally.
And like Starkey does like an hour and a half streams. I mean, and he did like the GB News coronation coverage was like 3 hours. So
which was pretty based. He called out all the bad bits on that. So far as I didn't watch it, by the way. I deliberately did not watch the coronation because I'm not a big fan of King Charles III. But we'll come on to that when I talk about this stuff from Scott, Marion later. But yeah.
Yes.
Do carry on, AI.
Yeah. So I mean, overall, the conference itself was you had a few like talks like that. YouTuber Alex and I thought was quite good. It was quite nice to hear. Then you had like Michael Gove talk about diversity, inclusion, and all that sort of gay shit. And then you had Douglas Murray, who basically said, I mean, there's been a bit of controversy because he basically said his was that why should we limit ourselves on nationalism just because Germany mucked it up in the twice in the last century? And I mean, yes, but at the same time, it's not. It's deeper than that, but he sort of misses the point. But yes, I think we understand what he's trying to say.
Germany and England are two different. Sorry, Germany and Britain are two different countries. For a start.
Yeah, and I mean, I have watched many and read many, speeches by like Goebbels and the painter himself, and in some ways, they do. I think Goebbels was a bit of a boomercon before boomers. Like if you listen to a lot of like his whole speech pattern, every speech he did was he start off and say, the Socialist Party, they're the real hypocrites and all this, and it's like. Like I was when I was watching some.
Well, he was, to be fair, the propaganda minister. So I mean, that's what he was there for. And I'm no fan of Goebbels.
No, I mean he was just weird. He comes across as a very weird person.
Well, he let his wife murder all their children before they shot each other. So he was a bit strange, wasn't he? Because I don't know a man who would let someone murder their children.
And of course,
or have left them in Berlin. By the way, I mean, why didn't he send them to the Western zone?
Yeah, I mean, Himmler obviously didn't get on with him. That much was clear. So,
and the chicken farmer Himmler was a great guy too. Right? Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was that. You had Suella Braverman there, and she was talking about, the problems with immigration.
Terrible, crappy speech.
Yeah, and the thing there is, what somebody pointed out at the time was, was okay, Conservative MPs, and recent same with Rees-Mogg. You're in charge. You theoretically, you're running the country.
Yeah. Yeah. Hang on.
And so, oh, is that directed at us?
No, it's directed at me, but that's all right.
Oh, okay.
He
So,
does it all. He does it all the time under various names.
so all those pesky MI5 agents in chat.
No, he's not one of those. Well, he could be, I guess. I don't know, but I don't think he
I
is.
saw one earlier. I did
Yeah.
see one earlier. You know.
He and I just do not get on. So there we go.
Okay.
And for anyone who doesn't notice it, this is what I said to him. Beg your pardon, not the one. That one.
Right. Yeah, and so the only speech that did kind of interest me is not because it was amazing substance, but it was the substance that came from a Conservative MP who we actually look in the background. He actually has a rather interesting record, and this is an MP for the constituency of Devizes called Daniel Kruger.
Yeah.
Just to give you the background, he's been an MP for I think since 2015. So he hasn't, relatively speaking, he hasn't been there that long. He first made headlines when he went to Hungary, where he met up with Viktor Orban and people as a similar conference. Well, I say similar, a similar style conference in Hungary, but where it was obviously more based and everything. And of course, if you look at Viktor Orban and his policies in Hungary, it's very much, we raise the natural birth rate of the Hungarian population. We have incentives to encourage women having more children and marriage, and you get the idea, right? Affordable housing, things like that, that actually benefits the indigenous population.
I believe that there's a thing, if you have enough kids as a married couple in Hungary, you can even get like a small holding or something, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, there are. There's also certain tax benefits. Well, I say tax benefits, they're actually quite good tax benefits as well.
Yeah.
It's and it. I mean, I haven't looked at the Hungarian census figures on this, but it'd be interesting to see how well that, because I imagine that will have some effect. Anywho, so Danny Kruger, he, at the conference, he talked about, his basically thing, his speech was about marriage, and he starts off with basically stating the obvious that marriage is between a man and a woman, and it's the only possible basis for a safe and successful society, which is correct.
100% true. Yes.
Yeah, that is correct. That's a correct. But it shouldn't be. I mean, the trouble is, I don't want to applaud this because that is just stating the obvious.
Yeah. It's. I mean, look, any Christian has to believe that, but also any sane man or woman also has to believe that.
Yeah, I mean, he is a self-described evangelical Christian, as what he describes himself. So, yeah. The Tory he then goes on to say that marriage is a public act that wider society should recognise and reward. And I've just picked up the BBC article here, where they've got a few more quotes. So he said he ended his speech with what he called 3 home truths that we need if we are to navigate these difficult times. The second truth is that the normative family held together by marriage, by mother, and by father, uh, st- sticking together for the sake of the children and for the sake of their own parents and for the sake of themselves. This is the only possible basis for a safe and successful society. Marriage is not all about you. It's not just a private arrangement. It's a public act by which you undertake to live for someone else and for the wider society. And wider society should recognize and reward this undertaking. So that is the crux of the speech. And
I would just say
there's
AI that Brian Borrow in the chat says accept gay marriage in air quotes, and yeah,
yeah, he
absolutely.
states, yeah,
I totally agree with
well,
what Brian Borrow says there. Like gay marriage is
yeah, I think,
bullshit.
I mean, he may have missed it, but he did state it. I did state at the beginning when I was reading through that he says he explicitly starts his speech saying that marriage is between a man and a woman.
Yes, he does.
So
Yes.
he does state that at the beginning. He isn't like, he's not propagating gay marriage in adoption or anything like that. So
No, I know he's not.
yeah,
I know he's not. I know
no,
he's
no,
not. So.
yeah. I was saying to Brian that he's not stating, he's
Yeah,
not trying to be
I think
subversive or
Brian
anything.
is supporting you, AI. Yeah, I don't think
Oh,
he
I
was
see.
having.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
don't think he was having a go
Yeah,
at you.
okay. No. That's it. No. He also talks about. I want to find the quote here because I did find it, which was quite. It was quite a good one because he actually identified basically his saying that the biggest problem in British society is modern liberalism, which is very because that I've never heard a politician in Britain actually say that, because usually they'll say cultural Marxism as like the extreme bit, or they'll say wokeism or extremist politics. That's usually the safe phrase, but he just goes straight in there and just says liberalism.
Yep,
So
totally agree with him.
yes, correct,
Totally agree.
correct
Look, while you
analysis
look
on
up
all.
that quote, while you look up that quote, I'd just like to ask Mitch what he thinks about this stuff.
I haven't really kept in touch with this whole
I mean,
National Conservative Conference.
what's Russia doing, Mitch, in terms of supporting families and stuff? I believe like there is some stuff in Russia that tries to support families, etc.
I mean, what generally? So, for example, you get generous tax credits, for example, with like families. You'll generally have the government, which will, for example, if you're someone who tries to promote sort of more hedonistic, anti-natalist lifestyles, Russian media won't promote you at all. However, the whole pro-natalism thing sort of feels half-assed in Russia, so because abortion is still legal there.
Cool.
It's not like in, say, Poland or Hungary where it's a lot more restricted. But like abortions, to be fair, have like fallen to the point where, in proportion to population, it's like less than it is over here. So, and it's been going down year by year since the fall of the Soviet Union, or rather, since Putin got in charge. So, that, and also the marriage rates in Russia have actually been going up quite a bit. So,
Cool.
I won't be surprised if. And also, there's generally that whole trend, isn't there, that after a major war, when all the men come back, and we've all got like, because I mean, a lot of the soldiers in Ukraine are getting paid decent enough wages from what I hear, if they are dependent on the oblasts or work. But then again, it's MLD that pays them, not the oblasts. But anyway, they'll come back home, and I mean, there's Russian guys on there who are saying, yeah, there might be a baby boom after this war. So,
well, there certainly was after World War II in the West. I mean, that's where the whole boomer thing comes from. So maybe.
yeah. Perhaps that's a bit
I mean,
optimistic. Oh, sorry.
to to segue in on the Russia thing, 'cause I haven't been able to, but I have found the responses to Danny Kruger's speech, which I think is quite interesting, because the response in the UK was there were BBC articles. There was a whole BBC page. It was in the top like 2 news slots on the day. You had various, yes, you mentioned Guardian, Spectator, all the journos did a piece on this. So obviously there was something in what he was saying was hit a nerve. So just to start off with, Andrew Boff, he is the Conservative chair of the London Assembly and a leading LGBT campaigner. He's a total shitbag and general scumbag of the parish. Told the BBC that Mr. Kruger's language was reminiscent of some of the diatribes that Vladimir Putin comes out with. He said, okay. He said Mr. Kruger does not speak for the average conservative. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, there should be air quotes around that conservative, though.
Yeah. This disgusting specimen then goes on to say, oh God, yeah, I lost it for a minute. Who want quote air quotes stable families, however they look to nurture young people and provide. Sorry, he said Mr. Kruger does not speak for the average conservative voter, who want stable families. However, they look to nurture young people and provide the building blocks of our communities. Mr. Boff said that there was no doubt the Conservative Party believed in strong families, but the definition of what the family is should not be down to any one religion, state, or political splinter group.
Well,
So
what is the family?
What is the family then? Yeah, I mean,
if it's not a man and a woman and their children, what the hell is a family? Is like
what is it?
some?
Is
it two gay guys buying babies from Ukraine? Because they ain't a family.
Well, yeah, it's that
might be child abuse, but they ain't a family.
It's also a stat for tax purposes. Line goes up. I mean that's all these fuckers think about. I mean it's oh okay.
100%. Look, guys, I just must say this because Jobu does this fairly frequently. Do you know what? I reckon if you really timed this stream, and I invite Jobu to go and do so, the AI has spoken more than me on this stream. So go ahead. And I haven't interrupted AI. No, I'm not having a go at you, mate. But I have interrupted AI twice to let Mitch speak because Mitch, I know, is not someone who will break in. All right? So get fucked, Jobu, honestly. And like I said, AI, I'm not having a go at you at all, mate. Like, people, this is supposed to be, and it is, like, three or four blokes talking in a pub. All right? That's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be this beautifully edited, like, edifice. So don't worry about it, mate. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, because I did interrupt you there.
That's all right. I mean, the event. So the event organizing PR team, I guess you call them that, did actually issue a response to the criticisms from Boff and other. There was other conservatives that joined in on this, and the response was the traditional family built around a lifelong bond between man and a woman, and a lifelong bond between parents and children is the foundation of all other achievements of our civilization. I mean, yes, there is one side to that though, and it goes back to what I think a few months ago AA had the confrontation with like the dad bros, where basically yes, it's important, but it's not unique. I mean, you can't really base your political identity around that because being a parent isn't that difficult, And the fact that
yeah.
it's not okay. Well, not difficult. It's not an exceptional skill. I shouldn't frame it like that. That's not a fair statement. It's not like being a fighter pilot or being a award-winning.
I'm interrupting you again. Look at this, Jobu. Look, all I would say is, being a dad is not an exceptional skill. Most men can do it, but it is quite an important skill, and especially in terms of being a good dad. If that makes any sense. If that makes any sense.
I understand. I think though what the takeaway is that if I guess you shouldn't make the family, or like if you're for a man in particular. I mean, for a woman, this really doesn't apply. But for a man in particular, don't just base your entire identity being being in the they call it in the longhouse, because that's that can lead to other problems down the road as well.
But AI being a dad is also like the longhouse is a fairly third world thing, to be honest. A nappy changing, as Alistair Doyle says in the chat, and bottle feeding and all this. Totally agree with all of that. But like being a dad in the sense of teaching your son to be a man, that's a different story. And so is it if you have a daughter and like protecting your daughter and making sure she doesn't marry a bad bloke. Those are a bit different. I would suggest. Like, look, I detest shopping. I don't do housework. I mean, I do a bit of housework now because I live on my own. But like when I was married, I didn't do housework. I took the bin out. I'd mow the lawn, but I didn't do housework. That was my wife. That was my woman's job, Yeah. So I do think there is a bit of a difference in that. But on the other hand, being a bloke and a father is an honourable thing to do. Like, it ain't going to make you like the ruler of the world or anything like that. But it is an honourable thing to do.
I mean, I would personally, I would say, and this is someone who's grown up in, let's say, southern Mediterranean climates. It is good for a man, if you're a father, to just be the patriarch of the family.
Yes.
Just be the dictator of the family, because quite frankly, that's the only way you can ensure you may die young if you have multiple. I've seen I've seen one Greek man who had very attractive daughters, and he was in fits every day because they would sort of try and push the boundaries, and he would always reel them back in as the patriarch. And I mean, he was like, I imagine he died quite young. I don't think he's alive anymore, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Mitch, what's your thoughts on this?
I don't really think I've got much to say, because I mean, I don't really know much about fatherhood, given me that. I mean, I'm only 22, so I won't be as wise on this as other
Did you have a good dad?
Yeah. He was like pick and mix.
So yeah, good bits and bad bits, you mean?
Yeah, because I mean, on one hand, yeah. So for example, he was an alcoholic, so he wasn't as present as a father should be.
Mm.
But did he do stuff like taking you fishing, giving you some advice, and did he do good things as well?
He'd give me advice in terms of like doing things. He was more like my grandfather, because my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he'd take me with like fishing when I was a kid. Unfortunately, he died.
Cool.
Yeah. My grandfather was like, he was also a coal miner, and like, there's like, I mean, I can't remember what TV show it's from, but he goes like, oh yeah, because the thing about coal miners is like, because they're working in the dark, they see everything. Like, so if you try to lie to them, they'll just sniff it out sharpish.
Yeah,
So it's like,
damn hard job too.
yeah, it's like, what? Like, for example, I mean, I remember a time when my granddad, like, one time he walks into a pub, and you know, my granddad wasn't particularly a tall man. He was like 5'5", but he was but he's like the kind of guy who, if you tried to get into a bar fight with him, all your teeth would come out. Your life would change forever in a very bad way if you tried to antagonize him.
And,
So,
and you said he was a World War II veteran, Mitch?
yeah, he's like, he served in Burma.
Oh, cool, man.
So,
In the 14th Army, great. They were one of the best British armies of World War II.
Same with my grandfather as well. He was in Burma.
In the 14th Army, oh, cool, man. You see,
Well, he was in the Royal Engineers.
But he would have been in the 14th Army if he was in Burma.
45.
Everyone was.
Yeah, he was.
That's
Major.
so cool. That's so cool. You guys have almost nothing in common, but both your grandfathers served in the 14th Army. That's so cool, man.
I think the funny thing is, my family have a long history tradition of being in the army because his uncle, my grandfather's uncle, was in the military in India, and he had brothers and such who were also like in Indian civil service and who were just like in India, working on
So you were part of the Raj
infrastructure.
and whatever.
Yeah, I'm a Raj adjacent family. It was basically, they were elevated from the Midlands from I guess like Methodist family and just became part of the Raj. Well, I think that going back to it, they went from company people to Raj people. They transitioned during that, what was it, 1858 sort of period. Going back, it was mainly in manufacturing factories and ceramics, stuff like that. So yeah,
That's cool. That's cool. I just like the fact that you and Mitch, both your granddads were in the 14th Army in Burma, where the British Indian Army, I guess you could say, inflicted the biggest defeat on the Japanese Imperial Army it ever had. So there you go. Ninius, why do you watch the stream if that's what you think? I don't understand you guys. Are you like masochists or something? Don't get it. But yeah, I like the fact that Mitch and AI, their granddads conceivably might have even met each other. Never known anything else. Although the 14th Army was a huge army.
Mitch, what rank was your grandfather? What rank did he eventually reach in Burma? Do you know at all?
he was like, the highest ranking was he was able to command like a squad because he was like, if you put like in terms of a company, he'd be the guy you put in charge. Let's say if you're a company of men and you have to outflank the enemy. I don't know what battles he served in because.
So he would have been an NCO of some description, which is that
that's NCO. I don't know precisely what rank from the top of my head because I'm trying to think sergeant or I don't know corporals or whatever. I'm trying to think of it.
Corporals were in charge of infantry sections, but in a platoon you had a platoon sergeant who very often, because of casualties, was actually in charge of the platoon. So he could have been either of those.
I said, Mitch, did he ever talk about Shimla at all? Did he ever go to Shimla?
Nah. He mainly talk about Arakan province. It's
Yeah,
all very
Arakan was where all the Brits were based, like before the big counter-offensive against the Japanese. So fair enough. That's absolutely fair.
I mean, I say Shimla wasn't in Burma. It was actually in India itself.
Is
In
it
it did
Shimla?
not.
I thought it was Simla, but all right.
Oh, it was.
You're talking about
That's
the Indian Army, the British Indian Army, the Anglo-Indian Army's officer place.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, that's how my grandfather pronounced it. I don't know if that was a local thing.
Well, look, mate,
yeah.
you might well be right. I don't know, but like Simla is how it's spelled. It's not spelt Shimla as Bandora has pointed out here. It's not spelt that way. It's Simla, as far as I know. But it could well be pronounced differently because I don't pretend to know.
Yeah, he always pronounced it Shimla, so but that may have been because he did speak because he was a major. You see, that was his rank.
Field officer, fair enough.
Yeah, and because he was a major and his younger brother was a lieutenant. And he they would go regularly to R&R, in Shimla. He even the funny thing is
it was a hill station.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you read some Kipling, and like Kipling is always brilliant, and of course was born in India. If you read some Kipling, that was where all the affairs happened between single British officers and married British women who didn't give a shit about their husband and all that kind of stuff. That all happened in and I'm still going to call it similar because that's what I've always called it.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, we've got a lot of photos of him meeting other officers. I got his diary actually in my bedroom here. Actually, I got his diary here. A list of names of because he used to have trouble remembering names, so he'd write down like their characteristics or physical appearances. Like so, Major so and so, he's got red hair or something, So that's kind of neat, and just like bits from his diary, what happened at this time, and
yeah, that's really nice, man. That's really cool.
Yeah, and
it's really cool. But I do find it interesting that you two guys, like both of your grandfathers, were fighting in the same damn campaign. That's so cool.
I mean, I guess he could have. My grandfather could have met Mitch's grandfather
Perfectly possible. But like there were a lot of guys in the 14th Army, but
maybe like on parade.
It's just cool that your grandfathers were fighting in the same campaign for a British Empire, which Winston Churchill had already destroyed pretty much. But
yeah, that's kind of interesting because one thing that he did talk about when he was alive, he said it was about 1944. He saw that he was like, oh, I see. Britain's giving up on India. That he came to that conclusion in 1944 when he saw the Indian National Congress and what was going on that level. So I mean there was a feeling of I mean, of course, the troops in India were referred to as the Forgotten Army, especially after the war. It was very much the forgotten conflict, and he very much viewed it as that. The Burma veterans were forgotten because of
even though they were one of the most successful British armies in World War II. But okay.
I mean, my grandfather, he was quite after the war, he used to do a lot of organized get-togethers, and he even got in one of our local towns a plaque because one of the towns where I used to live that used to have a lot of Burma veterans come from that particular area, and they got a special plaque in the local park, right in the middle of the local park, specifically for the Burma veterans, which was massive achievement for him. I remember going to the party for that. It was pretty good. and that was a few years
Oh.
before he passed away. So
No, that's cool, man. Mitch, what regiment was your granddad in? Do you know?
They were like, because you had my grandfather, he had one brother who, because they got separated, they weren't all put in the same battalion. You'd have 1st Battalion. I forget the order it was, but I'm pretty sure 1st Battalion was deployed in Operation Market Garden, and my great uncle from that got taken prisoner in Operation Market Garden. Well, up there. 2nd Battalion, I'm pretty sure, was the one deployed in Burma of the Staffordshire Regiment.
Oh,
And-
Staffordshires, cool. Yeah, no, the Staffs were a great regiment, really good regiment. Yeah.
Yeah, 2nd Battalion, I'm pretty sure that's the one that got deployed to Burma with my grandfather in it. And yeah, I generally can't remember. I mean, I generally can't remember the battles from the top of my head he took part in, because I mean, I was looking out for Kohima and Imphal, and
Yep, Kohima
like,
and Imphal were like the turning point of the war. The Japanese launched this massive, for people in the chat, the Japanese launched this massive invasion of India, which they thought was going to overturn the Raj. They thought all the Indians would rebel, and they attacked Imphal and Kohima and lost thoroughly because the British troops and some Indians and a lot of Gurkhas defeated the fuck out of them, basically.
yeah, actually, a very interesting story, because my grandfather, he had a lot of Indian troops, and the way that he would organize it was he basically did like a high, low, middle mechanism. So the low would be the Hindus, the middle would be the Sikhs, basically, and then the high would be obviously the English, British officers,
and the Gurkhas,
and the Gurkhas, and the Gurkhas would be higher than the Sikhs in that, because he would have the Sikhs, and the idea was, because one of the biggest problems he had when he said, because when he was stationed in Burma, is on a daily basis the Hindus and the Muslims would just go after each other non-stop. They wouldn't work together.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
And so discipline was, like, I think for him, discipline, he always said discipline was one of the things that was on his mind when out in Burma, because there were a lot of Indians who did there was a few that did join the Japanese regiment.
They were called the Indian. I'm trying to remember what the British and Indian soldiers called them. The British and Raj Indian soldiers, they called them the Burma Traitor Army, under Chandra Bose, I think his name was.
That's right. Yeah.
Who supported the Japanese. And generally speaking, when British and good Indian and Gurkha troops captured these guys, they didn't take many prisoners because they were, like I said, they were the Indian traitor army that was trying to invade India. Although after 1947, the Indian government tried to pretend these guys were great freedom fighters, which of course they weren't, not in any way, shape, or form, because anyone who understands how the Japanese East Asia co-prosperity fair, co-prosperity region really worked. It was like everyone was butchered who didn't totally do what the Japanese wanted, really. Yeah. And I'm not anti-Japanese, as people may know, but in World War II, they weren't too good, to be honest.
I say my grandfather, he absolutely hated the Japanese. I remember we were in a restaurant, and the Japanese family walked in, and he grabbed all of us and said, "That's it, we're leaving." So wouldn't be in the same building as one of them.
Yeah. Oh, look, you can read people like the Australian Russell Braddon, who was captured in Singapore, with the Australian forces there, and his story of being in Japanese prisoner of war camps, which were basically torture camps. Like they weren't treated well at all. They were tortured and killed constantly and treated like slaves. Even the Germans in World War II didn't do this.
I mean, also,
and like I said, I'm not anti-Japanese. I'm just anti-Japanese in World War II.
but also civilians were put in, like British civilians who were in, in the Far East, and
they were very badly treated.
They were put in prisoner of war camps, which
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. But like I said, I'm going to repeat it again. I am not anti-Japanese. I'm just anti-Japanese, like of the late 1930s and World War II. I think, but part of that was because in 1922, Britain ditched the Anglo-Japanese alliance, which had kept the Japanese as like a pretty good people in most cases. Like the German prisoners captured in Tsingtao in 1914 by the Japanese, many of them went home to Germany after the war in 1918, like bigger and heavier than they had been captured, because the Japanese treated them perfectly well. But after Britain abandoned the Anglo-Japanese Naval Treaty in 1922, as a result of the nonsense that was the Washington Naval Treaty, the Japanese felt totally betrayed and completely rejected many of the things that they thought were good, because the British had rejected them, not in favor of a treaty with America, but just because America said, no, you can't have that anymore after World War I.
Yeah. I mean, the American press were very, very much in a love affair with Gandhi and his crowd.
Well, the American press were in a love affair with anyone who was anti-colonial, because the American government was completely against colonial stuff. Like the so-called Atlantic Charter in, what was it, 41, 42? I'm not sure, 41 or 42. The Churchill and Roosevelt signed was like mostly against the British Empire, and yet Churchill still signed it. The half American Churchill, of course, but
yeah. And I mean, you got that god awful film Gandhi, which
which is bollocks, total bollocks. Nearly all of it is total bollocks.
Well, the only thing it does is it does show and maybe because of what the events that happened on the ground when he was a lawyer in South Africa, but it does actually show, he wasn't the innocent, let's have a dialogue character. He did engage in like direct action, protest action.
And he was a rich lawyer, in South Africa long before anything else. He used to pretend to be some sort of Indian fakir guy, but he was actually a very well-educated, rich Indian lawyer from South Africa.
Yeah, and he had a lot of friends in Oxford. He had a lot of friends in the UK, in the establishment, and in the Indian establishment as well. And I mean, it was just a formality. It was a done deal. The only thing that he wanted, which he couldn't have, was I think the only thing Gandhi wanted, he wanted the entire Raj to be to become independent and remain a single state. And of course, that was never going to happen. I mean, that was never going to happen anyway. So,
well, the British wanted to make it a single state, but the Muslims wouldn't have it, and Attlee's Labour government wanted to get out of India really quick, so we put up with enormous massacres as populations were transferred, and they really were enormous massacres, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Rather than, and had the British government not been Labour and Attlee, we might have been able to say, okay, we'll give you independence a year and a half in the future, and all of that, or most of that, actually could have been stopped. But I mean, Labour's always right, right? Excuse me, gentlemen, I have to go away for about 3 minutes. Please keep talking, and then I'm going to bring up a new subject.
Oh, okay. So what else? So somebody in chat here says, my grandmother fled India during partition. She witnessed a Hindu v Muslim massacre on a train heading to Goa. Yeah, a lot of that took place, and the problem was, the problem that you have, I think, was that if I've seen maps and census data from India during the Rajas, and there really wasn't, you didn't have like the Muslim majority north and the Hindu majority south. It was all rather mixed and matched, because I guess there wasn't really an expectation of India separating, and the creation of at the time a two-state, Pakistan, we're West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and India. I do think, though, it's kind of odd, Mitch, that the various Maharajas didn't have like much of a role in the creation of a new Indian state. Well, yeah, Bangladesh, Alice, that's right. Yeah,
I won't be surprised if it's like the Americans, like if we tried to form some sort of monarchist India, but the Americans would have just said, "Oh yeah, we're having a republic, or we'll just sanction you, or whatever." I won't be surprised if that was the case.
Yeah, I think there was an element of like American constitutionalism, and we're going to, republicanism played a big part in that.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, you had Nehru, who he caught a lot of Soviet aid, so like, and also he was sympathetic at times to sort of socialism or whatever. So I won't be surprised if he also wanted to get rid of all the Maharajas, because, for one, the previous system worked a lot with the British. So you also had post-independence India going, okay, we're going to have to get rid of the old order because they worked with the British too much. We must forge anew with a new sort of democratic system or whatever.
I mean, the problem though was with India is that before the Raj, India just didn't exist as a political entity at all. It was
100%. 100%.
It was. I mean, most of India's history has been, the Hindus being raped by Persian and Turkic Muslim empires from the north. I mean, let's be honest. It's and then you'd have a few holdout kingdoms in the south. That's usually the history of India.
And during the last viceroy of India, Mamban, who is King Charles III's great guy who he likes, who was murdered by the Provisional IRA, by the way. But the last viceroy of India, Mamban, his wife was being having sex stupid with Nehru while he was viceroy of India. So he was a total cock. Bam, bam. Total cock. And this is vastly beyond dispute because we have diaries, etc., that now explain it. Whether Mountbatten knew, I don't know, but I'd be surprised if he didn't. So, and like to me, like Mountbatten should have just said to Attlee, because Attlee and the Socialist Labour Party turned around and said, "No, we want you to be the last viceroy of India and make them independent." And Mountbatten was such a twat. He said, "Yeah, I'll agree." Whereas, like, had he been a decent man, he would have just said, "No, I'm not going to do it. Find someone else."
Yeah. I say Michael and Charlie. I mean, yeah, that was my point. The Tamil kingdoms, particularly in the south, weren't conquered by the Delhi Sultanate or the Mughal Empire. So yes, India wasn't united. It wasn't united.
It never was united, except under the British.
Under the British, yeah.
Yeah, India was. What are you doing, Nick?
Huh?
What are you doing?
Sounds like sandpaper or something.
It's just like cleaning something off my laptop for a second.
Oh, okay, fair enough. All right, guys. Last subject before we close. Probably, maybe half an hour. I don't know. I'm going to ask us about this, and I don't pretend to entirely know the answer myself. All right, but where are we? I've got to find it first. Carry on talking if you want, gents. Where the hell did I put this? I'm sure I put it in.
See, we just I'm just trying to address any other comments.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trouble is that you can't really claim a consistent. I mean, it'd be different if India or Hindu India, let's say, was united under united the whole of the subcontinent under one like grand emperor figure. Say like China, for example, and then you could say, well, there is like a continuity of a Chinese state, a Han, population or what have you. But yeah, I mean, because the Iron Duke, we were saying, I was surprised that I always thought to myself, why wasn't with the independence the various Maharajas not involved in the sort of creation of the new Indian state, and they were completely sidelined and to the point removed, abolished, degraded, and everything else. So
yeah, totally destroyed for sure.
Yeah, and many people view it as because they work with the British Empire, but I don't think that's the reason. I think that's just a bit of a cope. I actually think and Mitch pointed it out that remember after the war, America were calling the show, and they were the ones. I don't think they would have allowed sort of a Hindu monarchist state to come about.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. Can I just ask? Look, the statement on the screen now is my subject for this week. I like Scott Mannion. I think he makes a lot of good points. But he recently said the true King of England is immortal. To partake in his crusade is to beget immortality. Now, I don't think anyone who is not a moron would think that he's really referring to His Majesty King Charles III. What do you guys think about this, and what is he getting at? Do you think?
Yes. I mean, in the coronation, I want to say in the coronation, historically speaking, process, I mean, the king is anointed in a very much a ritualistic manner, which is that
Yep.
of becoming like a divine figure, almost like himself. And so he isn't just like a man. He is something more. He's something greater.
In theory. In
Yes.
theory, yes.
In theory, yeah. And I think I think it does work in practice when you have an absolute monarchy. I think the problem is we have a constitutional monarchy, but even then that's not it. We just have um a you know I mean, we're pretty much a republic in all but name at this point, to be absolutely honest.
Well,
Like in the
isn't
constitutional.
Charles defender of the faiths rather than the faith, i.e., the Church of England?
I think he is still.
Didn't the Archbishop of Canterbury spend most of his speech, which I don't even know why he made, before the coronation, going on about, Britain should absolutely take unending mass immigration. Did he not do that? Because I'm pretty sure he did.
I can't remember that bit, to be honest. I mean, technically, he is still the defender of the faith. He did say that, do you uphold the bit at the end of the ceremony was, do you promise to uphold and protect those of other faiths, and that and in your
And that
domain?
was totally new and was not anything to
Yeah,
do with the real
yeah,
coronation ceremony. That was added.
that's right. I
And
mean,
his queen consort, why she's a queen, I have no idea. Like Prince Albert wasn't a queen, wasn't the king consort. He was just a consort. But we have this divorcee who was having an affair with Charles before she got divorced, who is now somehow, in inverted commas, the queen. Like, she's never going to be my queen, I got to say.
yeah. I mean, on the topic of just monarchy, I mean, a monarch. In the Saxon, when I was reading Mark Morris's epic, I say great historical book on the history of the Saxons, is that one thing the Saxons valued above everything was wisdom.
And loyalty.
Wisdom,
And loyalty.
loyalty, and knowledge. And one virtue that was most important to a king was wisdom, because you there was so many. I mean, you had one particular which was like it was like, was it Ethelbert the Unwise or something like that? You had that one king that was who was just known as the Unwise.
Yep.
So
Ethelred.
Athelred, sorry, yeah, the Unwise,
Ethelred the Unready.
unready, yeah. And so you see that in the Saxon tradition, that there was this this relationship, but also you had because of the tribal system that the Saxons derived from, which again was different from what their contemporaries at the time in the Franks and the Visigoths, who were quite Romanized, and so there was a different. They very much adopted like a Roman imperial system, which would which would be the early formations of feudalism. There was very much more of a kinship, that the baron, the various, I forgot what, like the freemen and stuff, they were very much involved with the king. You didn't have this sort of I guess sort of a disconnect that that you because you in theory you could have you could be a count and in France or or in I'm just trying to think, in Francia or wherever, and you could never, you may never even meet you the king of Francia or something like that, or if you meet him, you in passing or something. So that relationship, was different in uh, Saxon and Anglo-Saxon England. But you also had the you had this thing which was I thought was quite interesting, was this really high trust society where you actually had like these on the road networks in Anglo-Saxon England. You had like these like points of rest where water and cups would be left with like the king's sort of graving on.
And
And
you had the burhs, of course, which were like
yeah,
defended towns all
yeah,
over England, which were designed to defend against the Norse, the Vikings.
yeah. And I mean, one thing that is, it's a shame because where I live now, there was a I would say an important holiday from a historical point of view, because the holiday was to celebrate Alfred's revenge against the Vikings, and the people where the people who lived where I live at the time, the men joined with Alfred's army, and he marched out with
Cool,
them.
cool.
He marched out with them. Bearing in mind, many of his other vassals weren't sure where he was, and he didn't know if they would come and rally with him at Eddington,
Yep, yep.
where
He sent messages, but he didn't know how many
no,
people would turn
but
up. But he
but
still decided he was going to fight.
yeah, but the men from my county were unquestionably, they joined him, and the thing there was at that time, no, I don't believe any Christian army had defeated the Vikings, and across Europe at that Christendom at that time, they very much believed the Vikings were the sent by hell. They were um, revenge for
Yeah, yeah.
degenerate behaviors and all that sort of stuff. And so the
So,
fear was real.
so true. The Europeans thought the Vikings were undefeatable, and the only country, the only place
Yeah,
where they
and
were
and and
defeated was England.
and like there were men from my local village who, and we know that the village dates back before the Doomsday Book, who went, were there. We know were there.
Yep.
And the problem is, part of that celebration that we have, a county-wide celebration, has now been bastardized into just, they don't celebrate the actual
The
legacy of
victory.
Alfred,
The victory.
no, or anything to do with it. It's just about diversity, inclusion, and selling like scones and stuff and
Yeah.
cider. I mean, that's
So
just
it's
like, yeah,
bullshit, basically.
yeah,
Like
yeah, it's basically
it's
become,
not about a great English victory, which it should be about. There is a reason Alfred the Great is the only English king, even though he wasn't totally an English king, although England was his idea. There is a reason that he's called Alfred the Great, because he was the only monarch who stood up against the Norse and
yeah,
the so-called Vikings.
Guthrum's army, yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah,
was the only dude who was able to defeat them, not once, but several times. And when Wessex was the only English kingdom that wasn't run by them, he was able to turn that around insofar as his grandson became the actual king of England.
yeah. When did say Alice asked when did was it ruined? Surprisingly after 1997. Don't know what happened at that particular time in history, but something
I
happened
do.
in
Tony
1997.
Blair.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. In the 90s, even in the 90s, there was you would have so many references to Alfred, and today there is none. You know, so
Yeah, you're not allowed
um,
to because he was an Englishman who fought back. You can't
I
claim
mean,
that.
what even annoys me is that you still have historical people who do like recreate where Alfred stayed and everything, and but they all dress up like those fucking American biker looking Vikings, you know, the most historically inaccurate looking Vikings and everything, and they just completely make a shit show of it. They just I don't know.
20,000 shield maidens, yeah,
Yeah,
which never existed. Total Viking myth. They were only
yeah,
ever Viking myth. Like
yeah. Do you know where the shield?
women make crap soldiers in
Do,
2023.
do you know where the shield
In the
made?
day when you were actually fighting someone with a spear and a shield or a sword and a shield, women were even more crap soldiers, and there
I mean,
weren't any
I
because
would
they
say
would have been crap
I'm
and would
joking.
have died.
I would say I have seen when I was a child a historical reenactment of and this was really good. It was actually showed what a Saxon warrior and a Viking warrior would have, and they would have chainmail, they would have leather,
Yep,
that
yep.
they'd have all the usual, the helmets and the axe swords. But when you see them all kitted out, I mean, it's kind of obvious that um a woman would not be able to have
No,
all that on.
no. And even if she did, she'd get killed immediately. And then she
Exactly.
would. And the whole point of the warfare in those days was a shield wall. And
Yes.
if you've got women in that shield wall, they're going to get killed first. And your shield wall is going to get penetrated. And you're all going to die. That would
Yeah.
have just been what happened. I mean, have any of these flipping idiots ever seen a woman in a bar fight? Because all they want to do is get out of there. And all that's happening in a bar fight is like people are throwing punches, maybe a few kicks, and the odd beer glass. But women, very sensibly for women, just want to get out of there. They don't want to hang around. But apparently they could be warriors. It's nonsense. It's utter, utter, utter nonsense and total lies.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the point that I mean, I always say Alfred the Great. I would say that he's probably the first true king of England in English spirit. In that regard, I mean, I guess you could go you could go back further, and I'm not saying there were any kings before him that weren't worthy of that, but I would say that he represents the biological and ethnic spirit of the Anglo-Saxons who are the English. Though the current curriculum will always start with William the Conqueror, William the Bastard of Normandy.
William the Bastard, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
William the Bastard. But then at the same time, I mean, the Normans, in some ways, they're quite overly represented because you had William Rufus, you had Henry the what was it? You had was it Robert? You had Robert, Henry, and then you had the disaster. You had the that great ship, the White Shipwreck off
Yeah. I know
Norfolk.
what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then of course it went to was it Empress Matilda, um, who then was remarried to Geoffrey of Anjou, and then of course you had the House of Anjou with Henry II. So
All right. Yeah, but
Robert, yeah,
you are entirely right, AI. I would just say to Alice Little in the chat, if your sister beat up a bloke, it was because the bloke let up. Basically, it's the only way she beat up a bloke. I'm sorry. You can watch as many Hollywood films where 90-pound
yeah.
wet women beat up 200-pound men as you like, but it ain't real. I'm sorry.
I mean, the myth of the Shield Maiden is, I mean, yes, the Shield Maidens are mentioned in Norse sagas, but the
But
point
it
is
is
that
a myth. It's a myth.
it's a myth, but the Shield Maidens, the Shield Maiden was, and I believe it was a grave in Scandinavia where a woman's body or a woman's pelvis. Remember, husbands and wives, it wasn't uncommon for them to be buried together, but
Hey,
regardless, okay.
you do know, AI, that these days, like the modern left will tell you that you cannot tell the difference between a skeleton,
Right,
not
okay.
only of a European or an African or an Asian, which we know
Oh, yeah.
you can, but they'll also try and tell you these days, no, you can't really tell the difference between the skeleton of a male or a female. You do know that, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I
That's
also
what they
remember
claim today, which we know is a lie.
my favorite one is that there was a Viking who was buried and he had like robes which with Arabic writing on it, and it's like, oh, he must have been a Muslim convert, and it's like, well, maybe, or maybe the more likely option is because he also had, you know, Thor's hammer on him in person. He also had other like armors from what they believe to be, maybe Francia and a sword, a Frankish sword and stuff. So maybe, just maybe, he just happened to be a bit of a collector, you know. But no,
Yeah,
obviously,
and some like ancient women who were the wives of powerful men got buried with stuff that other women didn't get buried with, to be honest.
yeah.
Mitch, you haven't said anything
I'm
for ages. What do you reckon?
Well, it's like that story of they're trying to say that, oh well, Viking York had a lot of Muslims there because we found a lot of coins from, what is it, the Abbasid Empire, I believe it would be at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
that's right. Yeah.
It was a Viking port, and they traded with the Muslims. We know this.
yeah, because the thing was, you have the Kiev and Rus. Now, through the Volga and Dnieper rivers, they're able to trade with the Middle East. That's how you got the Arabic coins, because, of course, it's like the same with a Sutton Hoo helmet. Comes from Sweden, but like because it's just trade between like Germanic tribes. Because you had the Rurikid dynasty. Well, up until the conversion to Christianity, they generally traded a lot with Scandinavia and Britain through the Danelaw. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like they try to portray it as, oh well, there were loads of Muslims in Jorvik, and it's like, no, it was literally just trade. Although very long distance trade, but trade nevertheless via the Volga River, via Novgorod, via Scandinavia into Jorvik.
Yeah. Alice Little in the chat says, didn't Tacitus say the Germanic women acted in kind of support role to their men in case of defeat? Yeah, but only with their voice, Alice. That, like, they would slag their men off as cowards if they weren't winning, but they weren't standing there with shields and spears and swords. No. Like when the Romans beat them, which they normally did, these Germanic women who were actually acting in support of their men all became slaves. That was what generally happened.
You have the
There's
Cimbrian
this
War.
really,
Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry,
Mitch,
carry on, Mitch. Sorry.
Mitch, carry on. Yes, please.
I was going to say, with the Cimbrian War, you had a situation where the Cimbrians were Germanic tribe trying to move into northern Italy. They got beaten by the Romans in battle, but the women, they killed themselves alongside their children, and the men were slaughtered by the Romans. So the women, they weren't just support role, they'd also act as a sort of rear guard, as in, if the men, they'd gang up on men who tried to run away, or if in case of defeat, they would kill themselves alongside the children because they don't want to get enslaved by the Romans.
Mitch, in theory they would, and some of them would, I'm sure, but like the vast majority of them wouldn't kill themselves and would just be made slaves. But yeah.
Well, the thing about Germanic society back in those days was very, very faithful. So for example, if you had a Germanic warrior who was slain in battle, and a Germanic woman feared that she'd be sold as a slave, yes, what would you prefer as a Germanic woman? Getting sold as a slave in the Mediterranean, or
If I had to
killing
guess,
yourself?
I'd probably say it would be at very best 50-50. At very best 50-50. Because like women's whole evolution has been this same story. Like always this has happened. Like a group of men will get butchered, and every bloke over like, I don't know, 13, 14 will get killed. But the women will be enslaved. And like women are kind of used to this to a large degree, to be fair.
Remember
Like
in Germanic
if you sorry, let me just finish.
carry on.
To be fair, this is like human evolutionary patterns. It really is. I mean, even today, we all know how women like bad boys, etc. There is a reason for this. Yeah, I'm not saying that Mitch is wrong. Of course, there were some like really loyal, good, brave German women who would no doubt like cut the throats of their children and then stab themselves in the heart. But I don't think it was ever more than at best 50-50, and I really doubt it was as high as that, to be honest. Because like life is kind of cool for most people. And I don't notice women being particularly more brave than men. But you know.
I mean,
the only thing
it doesn't. I'll say.
Carry on.
I was going to say it doesn't. I was going to say it doesn't require you to be brave to kill yourself. It just matters of okay. Well,
you don't
all
think?
your men.
Have you ever tried it, Mitch?
No, but I don't think
I have, and it didn't work. I just think it does.
Well, I'd say it requires you to be full of despair. And imagine like being a Germanic woman. Your husband's been slain in battle, fighting the Romans, and you know that you're probably going to see the inside of a prison ship being sold as a slave in southern Italy or wherever. You know,
most women would have gone along with that immediately instead of being killed. Trust me.
I mean, also, I would also come in to say, we in modern society, all of us, we live in a purely materialistic world, and that does affect our thinking, right? That's how we perceive the world.
Up to a point, yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, we're creatures of our modern surroundings. The Germanic people back then, I mean, let's be honest, they weren't Christian, so we can only read between the lines of how they would have from the Roman perspective, but it's safe to assume that they would not have seen any difference between the material world and the transcendental spiritual realm.
No, I don't agree with that, mate. I'm sorry.
Hold on. But the thing is, for them, the wind itself was the breath of gods. The stag in the woods was a message from the goddess Freya or something. Every aspect of their life was relationships with the gods, and because of Germanic society, in some ways, okay, if the men were all butchered, I don't know about the Swabians or anything, but it would the women killing themselves would have just been, well, our tribe is done for. We'll just reunite in the afterlife.
Yeah, look, look, I'm sure a minority of girls did that, but like the idea that the majority did is just silly.
I think a lot did.
Go and read things like Caesar's commentaries, etc. They didn't. All right.
A lot would.
The really strange thing is that most people don't want to die. They don't. They don't want to die. I'm sorry. So yeah. And Alice Little in the chat is talking about sati, but that's actually sati is what you're trying to talk about there. and the British, which was widow burning. Like when a man died, all his wives in India would have to chuck themselves on his funeral pyre, or would be more likely chucked on his funeral pyre. And the British indeed did stop that in India. Yes, they did. But the idea that like the majority of Germanic women would kill themselves rather than be enslaved by their owners is just like, it's just not true. Not true at all. It never was true. Wasn't true in 1944 when the Russians raped every poor bloody German woman from 8 years old to 80. Don't think it
Do
was
we
true
actually
in
know
the
the suicide rate of women? Because I
Oh,
believe
it
I
was
remember there was
high. It was high in 1944 for sure. Very high. There was a very high suicide rate in 1944 amongst Germans and German women. But like, you know, nearly every German woman from 8 to 80 got raped by the Soviets in 1945. Most of them didn't kill themselves. They didn't. I'm sorry. They just didn't. Do I blame
can
them? I don't
understand.
know. I'm not a chick, so yeah, whatever.
I mean, I can understand Goebbels and wife, the family suicide, because
No, I don't
they weren't
understand
just
the little
ordinary.
kids. Not the little kids. No, I don't. He could have got rid of those little kids and sent them to the
He could have,
West. And he could have
yeah,
sent them to the West.
I think their logic was basically there is no future without that the
Adolf
ultimate idea
babes.
is that
Yeah,
they would be,
Adolf
yeah,
babes. Yeah, right.
they'll, and also that that I think a lot there was they feared that they'd be taken by the Soviets and paraded, and God knows what would
But
happen.
he could have sent those kids to the West. He absolutely could have. And the British and Americans and
But he
Canadians
would have
were
he would
not
have had
going
to
to do
portray,
nasty things to children.
yeah, but to do that he would have had to portray the painter. So
Well, if you say
um,
so, all right, fine. I would have betrayed the painter immediately for my
yeah,
child.
I know.
But
I would have done like what was it? I would have done a Goering and Himmler and sort of got out of there. To be honest, but
all right, someone wants to ask this question, and I will absolutely answer it. Peter Whitaker wants to know, sorry, is this an inappropriate question? Can you guys comment on the incidents of sexual assault committed by the Western Allies? And I presume he means in Germany in 1945. In terms of the British and Canadians, it was very minimal. In terms of the Americans, it was pretty minimal. In terms of the French, much less so. That's all I'll say
yes,
on that.
I was going to say it was mainly the French sector.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff went
Wiggles in
on.
the chat is trying to claim it was the Yanks. Nah, it wasn't really. It was more the French. The French did
I mean,
it.
there is a photo of this American GI wearing the Holy Roman Emperor crown in a sort of comical fashion. Are you aware of the footage of that? Yeah. I think that was at Aachen. I think it was at Aachen when the Americans went in there.
Yep.
I mean, there are several instances where Americans did show total disregard for important objects and sort of history
Look,
of
AI,
Germany.
I've got to say this. Look, my grandfather was like in the British Liberation Army, as it was called. And my grandfather told my dad that, yeah, absolutely, if you wanted to have sex with a German woman, like a bar of chocolate or a pair of silk stockings was more than enough to do it. Because they needed the food or the money that they could get from those things. So that stuff happened, absolutely. But did my grandfather rape anyone? No, he didn't.
No.
I'm not
I mean,
saying
and
that no British, Canadian, or American troops ever raped anyone, because I'm sure there were many cases where that happened. But compared to the Russians, nothing.
well, actually, here's a better framing. Were there any look at look at the Western powers? Was it ever ordered or condoned by the like officer
No,
classes in those
it never
military?
was, but it was by the Russians. It absolutely
Yeah, well,
was by
there
the
we go.
Russians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, bloody hell,
And Timo
when
Arminius says there were no girl bosses in 1944 World War II Germany. No, there weren't. There were none, and there are none now either. It's purely it's purely a left wing Hollywood, dare I say, small hat nonsense. There's no such thing as a girl boss. I'm sorry. Like the average 5'7" skinny little bloke can beat up nearly any woman, and even feminists admit this in the laws that they get enacted. Like, there's no such thing as a girl boss. They don't exist. They never have existed. They never will exist. It's just a lie. And don't get me wrong, look, the idea of like going into an enemy's country and raping everyone from 8 to 80 is completely makes me sick. It makes me sick. But the Russians did do that in World War II in 1945, and they were told to by the Soviet government.
Yeah. Iron Duke, what was the penalty for British soldiers in Wellington's army for rape?
They'd get hung. They'd be hung.
There you go. Yeah.
Sometimes shot,
So
I guess, but yeah, hung or shot. Yeah.
Death penalty. Yeah. Same with looting, stealing. Yeah.
I'm not saying, by the way, that every single soldier in Wellington's army who ever raped anyone was shot or hung. But if they got caught, that's what happened to them.
Yeah.
And
I was saying
it was completely against the law.
Yeah. So what my point was, when Wellington crossed the from Spain into France, I mean into actual French territory, there was that was my point. He never there was never any, or when he was in India, he never at all in any circumstance condoned or allowed policies of rape or revenge against a
No,
population.
Wellington got stricter. As he went into France, he got much stricter. And he wouldn't even allow his Spanish allies to accompany the British and Portuguese forces into southern France because he knew what the Spanish would do.
I mean, also there was a good point that was in southern France. Of course, Napoleon wasn't that popular in southern France.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't, because of all the wars that the revolutionaries fought against the Catholics in southern France. Exactly, 100% true. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, 100% true. But yeah, Wellington wouldn't even allow the Spanish forces, who were supposedly his allies, to join in the invasion of southern France because he knew what they would do to the French River.
Yes.
Tomb of Arminius says Vendée, was it? Yeah, that was the Vendée. It was one of the vile campaigns that the French revolutionaries fought, where they butchered women and children all over the place. They'd even put like what they described as royalist women and children tied up in a barge, and they'd send them into the middle of the river and sink the barge so they all drown. That's what the revolutionaries were doing. They were vile, to say the absolute least.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, the
kind
only
of
good
reminds
thing
you
that
of.
Sorry, Mitch. What were
Sorry.
you saying, mate?
I was going to say, it's like, because you had, for example, in the French and Indian War, you'd have cases where the French army would generally be civil, but the allies, of like the Huron tribe or whatever, would generally be the complete bastards towards us, like scalping young captured men who were wounded and massacring women and children because they don't believe in terms of surrender.
100, man. Yep, totally true. Yeah, no, I totally agree, Mitch. Yeah, that happened a lot. I don't think we've really addressed this question that I want to address before we stop. What do you think, as in Mitch and AI, what do you think that Scott Mannion means by this? The true King of England is immortal. To partake in his crusade is to beget immortality. Now, like I've already said, this is not King Charles III. Sadly, I wish it was, but it ain't. What do you guys think he means by that?
So Mitch, you want to go first at all? Or,
I might have some idea, but I mean, like, to be fair, like, the King of England is immortal. I mean, what? So I won't be surprised if he's referring to God, I suppose, because there's a general theme about monarchies in the Indo-European tradition where they're all God anointed. Like how Alfred the Great, even when he was a Christian, would claim that he was descended from Woden,
Yep.
as all sons of his dynasty would say we're all sons of Woden, and that is like because Woden was generally, for example, the wandering god who collected wisdom and sacrificed his eye to gain all knowledge. So anyone who's descended from Woden is generally wise and all-knowing, which is why Ethelred being unready, was generally sort of a black sheep of a family, so to speak.
Yep. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. That does make sense. I do. That's kind of what I think. I think he means like the real King of England is like some kind of what's the correct term? Religious.
Well, God anointed monarch.
Yeah, it's a figure above mere humanity. I think that's what he means, but yeah, fair enough, Mitch. I think that's a good stab at it.
And then you got the whole top. Oh, sorry.
No, you carry
you
on,
got.
Mitch.
I was just going to say, to partake in his crusade means to beget immortality. I'm just imagining sort of what being a humble servant of, like, because, like, I don't know, let's say you were a man who followed Alfred the Great into battle against the Vikings at Effendon, for example.
Yep.
In a way, you kind of obtain immortality in a sense by just being remembered for a time as someone who fought for England. I suppose that's the best way I'd rationalize it. I don't know what
Yep.
AI would say about it, but
I'd agree with you. AI, what do you think?
yeah, I mean, part of the one thing that in historic coronations going back to the Saxon times, even into the Christian Saxon times, is that in the coronation, the bishop, abbot, whoever conducts the service, would say, "Do you swear to confront and destroy and defeat evil?" And I think what they mean by what Scott means by this is that the role of a king is he is ultimately the bridger of worlds between gods, but he's to lead the people of his kingdom towards God, and that he has to lead the people on that path while he is present on earth, and
And against evil.
against evil. And so in Alfred's day, that was the Vikings. In other terms, that could be the French or whatever the case may be. but I think that one thing I always go back to is that in Lord of the Rings, the way they represent in the book is Aragorn, Faramir, people like that. They are I mean, Faramir is like the one where I say he's totally dedicated to duty. Even putting his, putting himself, his own. Um, uh, there's that point where he could take the ring for a hit for himself and take it back and for the benefit of his father Denethor, but he doesn't, and he upholds in some ways he does actually uphold that sort of Christian duty of you know letting evil go, letting helping to destroy evil.
Yeah, yeah.
And
AI, look, for the benefit of the chat, like, you have to understand that in the Lord of the Rings, the author was a professor of Anglo-Saxon
yes,
and an absolute British nationalist, total British nationalist. So yeah, totally agree with you. AI, carry on, mate.
yeah, and also, I mean, the way that that the like Aragon and Faramir and all these how they interact with the hobbits. They don't treat them any different because of uh their station. That there is like this uh th- there is like there's almost like this immediate sort of camaraderie relationship, even though they're from different but one titled families to that gentry. So there's also that as well that sort of that plays on that, and I think ultimately a king. I think when we talk about the great kings of England or and the Anglo-Saxon England, is that they're almost mythical. I think Alfred is mythical in some way as Arthur.
Yep,
Um,
yep. Yeah,
I
no,
think he's
I don't disagree with that. I mean, who are the great kings of England? I mean, obviously, Alfred the Great, who wasn't really a king of England, although he had the idea of England. But then Henry V, a great
yeah.
king of England. Um, Edward III, for sure.
Henry
Yeah,
the I would say, I mean, for me one that sort of maybe controversial because of the Tudors, but Henry the Seventh, I think he was quite a good king. I think he I think what he the way that he had to fight for his throne um is something bearing in mind he was there were plots against his life, and he was exiled for much of his youth. I think shows definitely endurance.
but we all kind of know the great kings of England.
Yeah,
I
the great king.
mean, you know, Richard the First, Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah,
We all kind of see those guys and see, hang on, this was a great man, you know.
yeah,
Normally a great military leader, but also someone who was known for fairness and justice in England,
yeah,
because they're almost always the same. Like the guys who were the great military leaders who led English troops to great conquests were almost always also well known as good kings back in England who were in favor of fairness and justice and, like, you know, the ordinary English people didn't have to fear them.
of course you got Edward the Confessor as well.
Yep, yep.
Yep. I mean, he is now. Actually, I think he is the most religious and spiritual connection to the English identity because he. I mean, he's. I think he's the only monarch that is a saint.
Yeah, he is.
And he has, I mean, even in the coronation that happened recently, there were many references. With Starkey's point was that you have to say Edward's crown. The entire service is quite closely linked to Edward the Confessor's service. So there, I mean, he is quite an important. I would say he's probably again one in the top, top 10 important ones. But I think in many ways it does go back to Alfred and the House of Wessex.
Yeah, yeah, it does for sure. King Alfred the Great. He's known as the Grey for a reason. He was to me, he was the starting point of the English nation, really.
Yeah. And remember, he wasn't destined to be king. His brother, who was the king, I forgot.
Two brothers, I believe, actually.
Yeah,
yeah.
He was studying. I believe Alfred was studying to become to enter the church.
And yet he became a great general who defeated the Norse, the Vikings.
Yeah, and also after the defeat, Guthrum and his entire family converted to Christianity.
Tomb of Arminius says, did he have Negroes singing? Well, obviously not, because there were no Negroes in England in the time of Alfred the Great. Adam says 3 to 4 brothers. Yeah, I think that's probably fairly accurate, actually. But yeah, I don't know. Mitch, thinking on this?
In terms of like Alfred the Great, I mean, he's pretty much like the founding father of England, but for some reason, we're just chosen to abandon all sense of memory of him.
100%.
Because reasons.
Yeah.
Whereas Americans can tell you about George Washington, even though, I mean, a guy like me, for example, will criticize Washington for his military record, but you cannot deny
not very good. Which is not very good, to be fair to you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Didn't he commit war crimes against the French and the Indians?
No, look, I don't know if he did that, but like Washington's major achievement was just about making his army hang together when they were continually beaten by the British. That's the main thing he did. He wasn't a great battlefield commander at all. But he did manage to keep just about enough of his army together after they lost time after time to the Brits. But, whatever. But I do think that Mitch was making a good point that Alfred the Great was like a really, really, really outstanding man. And these days, do you learn about him in British schools? Yeah, not really. Not really at all. Because you mustn't say anything nice about the real Anglo-Celtic people of England or Britain, because, it doesn't suit our Indian banker, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, or his overlord, the senile Joe Biden. That's my own opinion about it.
I mean, Alfred, he was forced from his throne, his capital, into the West Country, into the marshes of Somerset.
Yeah, he had to live on little marshy islands. This is where this nonsense burning of the cakes crap comes from.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, he was the Isle of Avalon. So again, that plays into the mythology of the Arthurian legend as well. He had his army was scattered. He had the men of Somerset and Wiltshire, Devon. But the remaining vassals in his domain weren't even sure. I mean, many of them weren't sure if he was still alive. They knew that he went westwards.
Yep.
And there was the thing there is, I imagine in his mind, he never gave up. I bet there was a lot of people in his court that probably were of the mind.
But he sent
over.
he sent messages AI to the men of Sussex, for example, and the men of Sussex marched to his relief just
Oh yeah,
on the base of that one messenger who
yeah. I was
said,
gonna
"No,
say,
King
yeah, yeah.
Alfred is still alive," and the men of Sussex got together and they marched to his relief.
Yeah, when he emerged from the West Country with his yeah, that's right. And that that is I mean, I think in some ways it reminds me of Gondor calling for aid, for Rohan.
Yep, yep. And I don't think it was
It's not.
like
It was the
Tolkien was a professor of Anglo-Saxon. He knew what he was writing about,
yeah.
and I think he had that in mind when he looked at it.
I think the Battle of Pelennor Fields in Lord of the Rings was based off the Roman Hunnic Wars, though I think it was, but I don't think it was directly based, but I think there were certain aspects of it that did play into that, though.
Yeah. Look, but Tolkien used Roman, Byzantium, and British, and even Germanic and like Scandinavian themes. He absolutely did, but he was an expert on all that stuff. And I really do believe that, like, when you're looking at some of the big battles in the book, when they're sending for aid and people come, he was definitely looking at stuff like Alfred sending to Sussex and the men of Sussex just saying, well, this is our king. We're going to go and help him,
Yeah.
I absolutely think that was true. And I think Tolkien did it on purpose, and I think he was right.
Yeah, you can definitely tell because basically Rohan just seems to me like what happens if like you have Anglo-Saxons mixed in with sort of like an equestrian tradition akin to well, it's like you got the Gothic, the Gepids of Eastern Europe, who Germanic tribe that collaborated a lot with the Huns, only to get wrecked by pretty much everyone else once the Huns failed. So I thought that was probably his inspiration. He wanted like an Anglo-Saxon culture, but it was centered around horses because Rohan is as flat as a pancake for the most part. Well, and Gondor seems to be like sort of I don't know. Would you describe Gondor as a Holy Roman Empire? I don't know.
Well, they were horse people, weren't they? Like,
I think Numenor was Rome in the books.
for sure.
Probably late Rome, if I'm absolutely honest, in some regards, but
Yep.
Rome nonetheless. I always thought Gondor was more Franks, the Frankish kingdom, and Rohan was like the Anglo-Saxons. That's how I always
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, like the conversion to Christianity had of King Ethelbert, I think his name was, of Kent. He married a princess from France of a Frankish Merovingian dynasty. Yeah,
Bertha.
and that's how.
Yeah.
And that's what started it really. So back then, I can imagine in Anglo-Saxon times, back when the French were speaking a Germanic language, not whatever it is they speak these days.
Yeah. Well, she brought the Saint Augustine. Was it Saint Augustine? With or one of
So I know there's a Gregorian mission, which apparently there's something like the Pope Gregorius was quoted as saying that he found the Anglo-Saxon men to be a handsome race, and so he thought converting them to Christianity would be a damn good thing to do as his tenure as Pope. So
The trouble was that
Yeah.
the Irish monks began the process in Northumberland, and the funny thing is, though, in Northumberland and Mercia, and in East Anglia, that they converted the king, and then when they left, the king they just reverted back to paganism, and that in Northumberland it happened like 6 or 7 times. So
Also, guys, don't forget that after 1066, when William the Bastard invaded England and sadly won the Battle of Hastings, the Vangarian Guard in Constantinople of the Byzantine empires, who were actually the last of the Romans, their Vangarian Guard became more Anglo-Saxon than it did Germanic.
well, yes, because during the First Crusade, the Normans who ruled over Sicily, when they went on the Crusades and were aligned with the Eastern Roman Empire, you had a moment where you had Anglo-Saxon Anglo-Saxons in the Varangian Guard, and then like Normans and knights who served at Hastings, like meeting up as allies.
Yep. But I
mean,
still think the reason I think it's an interesting AI is because like the very last of the Roman Empire ended up being defended by Anglo-Saxons, which I kind of find interesting. I like the Roman Empire. I think it was a good thing, and it was generally like the basis of the West after the Greeks, after the ancient Greeks. But yeah, strange to say, in the end, it's like most stalwart defenders were Anglo-Saxons. So there you go. I find that quite interesting, to be honest.
Yes. I'm afraid, Andrew, I'm going to have to go now because my dog is scratching at the door.
No worries, man. If your dog wants to go outside, you can't go and help.
I've got to go. Thanks for having me on. I'll see you later.
Mate, you're always most welcome, and thank you for joining us. Did you have anything you wanted to plug? Scott? All right. Yeah, so all of that is where it is. Mitch, any final thoughts?
I mean, I'm trying to think of something to say, but I can't from the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean, in the case of Numenor, I mean, because I read before of Numenor, and the book generally goes that they had like the Numenorians were generally practically the Ubermensch. You know, they cared for animals. They were very civilized people. They achieved great feats of navigation. They were generally kind of like, imagine like a mix of the Romans, the Vikings, the Greeks, and at the apex, the British Empire all merged into one civilization.
Yep. Fair enough.
And then, but the problem was because Iluvatar, who's like the creator of Middle Earth, he gives the Numenorians their own island, and he says, "Okay, you won't be immortal, but I will give you extended lifespans compared to other races of men." But the problem
yeah.
But the thing was, you've given them an elvish mind, or an immortal mind, but in an immortal body. So you've just embittered them in the long term because they're going to think they've been cheated. And over time, that's what they end up doing is they build up their civilization over time in spite of the gods. And in time, they eventually get deceived by Sauron because Sauron uses their fear of death against them. And that's what gets Numenor washed away by the tides. Because there's already built up resentment over the fact that they are men of great learning and what have you, but they're cursed to have mortal lives, while the elves get to have everything. And yeah, he just embittered them. Sauron the Deceiver uses it to his advantage. He gets Numenor destroyed, although Sauron has his physical body destroyed, as in his actual, like the side that looks more physically attractive, shall we say, and more appealing to the eye. So that's why Sauron, by the time of Lord of the Rings, he's seen as the devilish form he gets, because that's the only physical form he's got left.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Wiggle says Numenorians were basically English. If you make them as the best people in Middle Earth, then yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, because it's certainly true on real Earth. But anyway, no, that's not the one I wanted to do. That was the one I wanted to do. Peter Whitaker goes on about grey squirrels. I hear this all the time. Are the apex or boreal power of our time. The grey conquest made English squirrels more competitive. The red squirrels are also pushed to be more innovative to resist the greys. You know what, guys? Squirrels are just squirrels. Sorry. I don't. Red squirrels are great, but red squirrels can't live in many of the places that grey squirrels can. All right, that's what I would say about that. Other than that, I would say I'm going to be doing a stream shortly about, when I say shortly, in the next week or so, about the English yeoman. And for anyone who doesn't know what an English yeoman is, that's a bloke who owns either a small farm or even a small holding, but he owns some property. And he was the basis of the English war bowmen in the 100 Years' War. And I'm going to be doing a stream about these dudes. And they're not exactly what many people think they were. They were much more professional than some people think they were. They were much better armored than many people think they were. And we're going to be doing a stream about that, which I'd like very much Mitch to join if he wants to. Mitch, anything you wanted to plug, and hopefully you'll join that stream.
No, I can't. I've got nothing to show.
All right. I will shill AI's channel. Go and check out AI's channel. He left before I had a chance to ask him about it. If he tells me later, I'll stick it in the description. Thanks very much to AI and Mitch for joining us this evening. What can I say? Go well, audience, and never let the bastards grind you down, because they're trying to do it every single day. Don't surrender.